So far in our documents, all the text has been displayed as black, which of course is the default color. So now I'd like to go over how to change the colors using CSS. Let's go over to our first paragraph in the document and we'll try it out. We already have a style attribute in the tag, so I can just add in another property. And that property name is just simply color. To set the value, we have several different ways to define the color. So for our first example, we'll try the simplest one. And for that, we can just use color names. There are 140 accepted color names to choose from. And at the end of the series, I'll give you some links to references for this list. But for now, it's sufficient to know that all the plain colors are supported, like yellow, blue, orange, and red. So let's try green here. Now we can save our new change here, and we'll go out to the browser and see how that looks. As you would expect, the first paragraph turns green now. Now, of course, not every web page design will use colors that are included in the 140 named ones, so we'll need to have a way to get the exact color we're looking for. The most traditional way to define colors for the web uses a hexadecimal number to set the mix of red, green, and blue that make up the color. Now, I'm sure that most of you don't normally count using hexadecimal, but it's not too hard to figure out. And most every computer paint program will show you the values when you pick a color. But let me go over it quickly so you know what's going on. When you choose a color in a paint program, it will normally tell you the values of each red, blue, and green component as a number from 0 to 256. With the hexadecimal color code, we're doing the same thing, but in hex there are 16 digits instead of 10. So when we count, we use the digits 0 to 9 to start with. But for hexadecimal, we need 6 other digits as well, so we use the letters A through F to represent our numbers. Now I know that sounds strange, but at least there's an easy way to understand the lowest and highest numbers. In hex, you would still use 0 to mean the lowest value, but the highest value would be F. And actually, if we put FF together, that's equivalent to the number 256. Now let's try it out on the first paragraph. I'll reset the color definition here. When using a hexadecimal value, we start out the color code using the pound sign or the number sign. And then we'll have 2 digits for each of the colors red, green, and blue. So if we wanted red, we would need the highest number for our red component, which is FF. And then we don't need any green or blue. So I would use 00 for green and 00 for blue. Now let's save that change, and we'll go back out to our browser. Well, you can see we got the color right because our top paragraph is now red. Now if you wanted a white color, you would just use FF for blue and green as well. So white would look like this. And of course, if you wanted a black color, you would use all zeros for each one of the component values. A gray color is easy to spot because it uses the same value for each one of the components. For instance, I could use something like 7A for red, 7A for green, and 7A for blue. And if I save that change, that should be something in a middle gray, since the value we're picking is in the middle of the minimum and maximum values. Now sometimes you'll see a hex color described using only 3 characters, and for those cases, each color component has only 1 digit. So I could go over to our page and use 0 for red, 0 for green, and F for blue. And if I save that, I should end up with a blue paragraph. These hexadecimal color codes are more traditional, and they've been used since the first browsers were available. So they work in every single browser that we have. Now with HTML5, we have a new way to describe colors that's much more familiar, but it'll only work in the newer versions of our browsers. This new color system allows us to use the RGB values directly with the normal numbers we're used to. To set up a color like this, I'll select our color definition from before, and I'll replace it by typing first RGB, and then I'll add some parentheses. And in the parentheses, we use the values we're used to. So if I wanted a red color again, I would use 256, which is the maximum color value. And then I would use 0, 0 for the green and blue values. Let me close off the parentheses inside of our color definition. We'll save our change. And if we go back out to our browser and refresh, we now have a red paragraph again. Another variation of this allows you to use HSL colors, which stands for hue, saturation, and brightness. I'll give an example. I'll put in HSL And for that, we have a hue value, which basically picks a color in the rainbow. I'll use 120 for that. And for our saturation and brightness values, we use percentages. So I'll use something like 60% for the saturation and another 60% for the brightness. Now I'm sure this is probably hard for you to interpret, but when I save this change and go over and refresh our page, you can see that that gives me kind of a middle green color. Now, as I said, I don't expect you to just come up with these color mixes yourself. You can just use most paint programs to give you the values that you need to use. Here I'll bring up Photoshop once again, just to show you its color picker. Whenever I choose a color, you can see that it gives me the values of the color in all of these different formats. I have hue, saturation, and brightness. I have the RGB values here. And at the bottom, you can see it gives me the hexadecimal value as well. So I can just pick the color definition I want and then insert it into my style. Just remember that the new RGB and HSL values will only work in the newest browsers. So if you want to make sure the color shows up right even in old browsers, then choose the hex one. Now there is one more thing I want to show you while we're still talking about colors. The two new color descriptions that we've seen also have an extra feature that can come in handy for some of your designs. When using RGB or HSL, you can actually add a fourth control to make your color transparent. So instead of typing RGB, I'll type in RGBA. Now let me go back to a red color here so we can see how this works. I'll use the maximum red value again, 256. And I'll change these two percentage values both back to 0 for our green and blue components. And then after the last color component, I'll just add another comma, and I can add in a fourth number. The A in the definition is short for alpha, and for it we use a number between 0, which is completely transparent, and 1, which is completely opaque. So for this example, I'll just use 0.5. Now let's save that change, and we'll go back over to our browser and refresh the page. Now you can see we're still getting a red, but if you look closely, you'll notice that it's a much lighter red color than we saw before. For our page right now, we only have a white background. So it's mixing the white and the red values to come up with a lighter red. In a later lesson, I'll show you how we can do some more advanced background settings, and then we can make use of some of the transparent colors then.